The 18th Amendment was very controversial, in which it banned the manufacturing and transportation of alcohol. This was a result from the temperance movement, gaining momentum in the early 20th century. It started a century ago when religious ideas revived and spread throughout the United States. In the years to come, Maine would be the first state to pass the prohibition law. Many states would later follow. Near the end of the 19th century, the temperance movement took hold in communities, in which women played a huge role. Women saw alcohol as a destructive force for ruining marriages. Many factory owners agreed and supported the movement because many workers would come intoxicated and raise the risk for injury and insufficient work. By 1917, as the U.S. entered the First World War, Congress emplaced temporary prohibition to increase crop production for food. After the war ended, it only took 11 months to ratify prohibition throughout the nation. Prohibition, also known as the 18th Amendment, in its inception near the latter part of the 1910s, was outlined to eradicate alcohol manufacturing and distribution. However, the use of alcohol skyrocketed across the nation. Corruption overflowed through people with power, and organized crime was abundant throughout the United States.
Prohibition caused an overflow of corruption among people with power. Even though the 18th Amendment was passed, some prohibition acts were not strictly enforced, especially in big cities like Washington, D.C. and Chicago. In these big cities, drinking was part of the society. Many criminals rose throughout the city because of the 18th Amendment. All of this caused political corruption in the government system. An example of a corrupt official is Roy Olmsted. He was a Seattle police officer who began to import alcohol in 1919. Olmsted got caught when the 18th Amendment was passed. He got fired from being a police officer, but this allowed him to become a full-time bootlegger. He was able to make more money than he would have ever made being a police officer. Olmsted would pay officials to turn their heads and not turn him into the authorities. Over the time, many other police officers stopped enforcing the 18th Amendment and instead started to take part in the illegal acts of alcohol. The officers would help and protect smugglers, escort liquor trucks, and accept bribes. An example of these actions is when Charles Fitzmaurice, the chief police of the mayor of Chicago, William Hale Thompson, stated, 60% of my police are in the bootlegging business. All of this corruption was due to the 18th Amendment.
January 16, 1919, a date that shook the U.S. in a heartbeat. The 18th Amendment came rolling in, taking out all alcohol production and consumption for the public good. This amendment was designed to battle the violence caused by alcohol abuse and unholy marriage, keep families together. The solution to this chaos was to ultimately ban the manufacturing, sale, and transportation of all alcoholic beverages in the United States. Although, in the eyes of the U.S. government, progress was really rising, but in reality, society was only getting worse in the public eye. The public took advantage of the need for alcohol in life, and in small-time businesses rose and secretly supplied the public with stored alcohol. It was more common to see people make their own batch of booze from the ground up. This was known as moonshining. Small-time businesses gave struggling families a second start at life, with huge income brought in from moonshining. As time rolls on, moonshining caused many conflicts, including health issues due to poor distilling of alcohol and lack of proper sanitation. At first, many people didn't care about the effects of overconsumption of alcohol, since everyone was in big cities and rural areas saw drinking as a daily routine. As underground clubs grew and became more frequent, the use of alcohol brought new, unseen illnesses into the world. The main illness brought upon overdrinking was liver damage, which would cause irreversible damage to the liver tissue. Also, digestive problems would occur, and high blood pressure was very frequent in everyday users. Users with an increased chance of cancer and the immune system deficiency. As users became more attached to alcohol, they began to explore other drugs such as cocaine, opium, and sterno, which also had a devastating effect on the users. As business with moonshining grew into other areas with drugs, organized crime increased throughout rival gangs and caused street wars over the control of alcohol industry.
The effects of Prohibition was taking its toll on America. Before Prohibition, gangsters were prospering mostly from gambling and prostitution rackets. But as the 18th Amendment was put to use, organized crime syndicates flourished and financially received the boost from Prohibition. As the American government banned the sale and supply of alcohol in January of 1920, gangsters took advantage of this opportunity to make money. In no time, the underground black market for alcohol was in full run and supplied the people's thirst. Speakeasies, which were illegal underground bars, provided a safe social environment where people could enjoy liquor in public. Speakeasies got their name because one usually had to recite a password to enter the establishment. Producing homemade alcohol had also become a common thing, and this led to bootlegging. Secret breweries would make liquor and would sell it to gangsters, who would then transport and distribute this bootlegged liquor. Imported liquor was also a popular thing, coming from places like Canada, Mexico, and the Bahamas. Bootlegging became an industry, and one can't talk about it without mentioning the famous gangster of this era, Al Capone. Based in Chicago, Al Capone had created an empire off of bootlegging and illegal liquor. He controlled organized crime in Chicago, everything from gambling rackets to, of course, bootlegging. Al Capone had his own delivery trucks, breweries, and bodyguards to help transport liquor. One would think that Al Capone would have been caught early in his career for transporting as much liquor as he did. But Capone bribed officials and police so that he could continue his work. Gangsters like Capone were often seen as Robin Hood figures because of how they contributed to the people. Al Capone was a highly visible public figure. He provided daily milk rations to Chicago school children and opened many soup kitchens for the poor and homeless suffering from the Great Depression. Despite all this, he was also seen as a killer, as were many gangsters during this era. The violence that bootlegging produced just added to the increased crime rate during Prohibition. Different gangs and mobsters would fight and clash with each other for control of a territory or community. To control crime and bootlegging in a territory during Prohibition meant income for gangs. Competition for control was widespread throughout the U.S. and its criminals.
In conclusion, the 1920s started out as a bright, prosperous, and profitable era for many people. As the 18th Amendment took effect in the early part of 1920, alcohol use did decline over time in its first couple of years, but as people learned to create moonshine, the use of alcohol increased. Creating moonshine grew into a large industry called bootlegging. Bootlegging was a quick way to score easy money in the eyes of struggling men with families to care for. This led to the huge increase in organized crime through the large cities in the U.S. like Chicago, Washington, D.C., and New York. A well-known gangster of this era is Al Capone, who made millions of dollars through bootlegging. This all wouldn't have been able without the help of cops turning their backs and taking bribes. Corruption grew towards the end of the 1920s through all levels of government. Roy Olmsted, who we discussed about earlier, is a good example of this. He made plenty of money he wouldn't have been able to make if he had stayed a cop. The temperance movement also died down through Prohibition because it was easy to see the effects of Prohibition through the entire nation. It had sparked its own public crisis. Bootlegged liquor led to blindness, liver damage, and in some cases, paralysis. An estimation of 1,000 deaths per year occurred due to consuming bootlegged liquor. As the end of 1932 rolled around, the end of Prohibition can be seen in sight for the American citizen. December 5th of 1933, the 21st Amendment was ratified and the 18th Amendment was repealed and no longer in effect. It was a risky experiment gone wrong, and in the end, the nation learned there is no true way to stop the manufacturing and distribution of alcohol. She just wanna close her eyes and sweat.